Hi, I'm Rachel Lane, and this is my final presentation for 7OK717. So first, we'll begin by considering a case study from my field placement this year within a school setting, where I primarily work with 5th through 8th grade students. The case study concerns student D. For the student's Individualized Education Plan, or IEP, I work with student D weekly to work on their regulation and coping skills. For majority of our previous groups, the student has presented as ambivalent and dismissive of our time together in group. Due to this, I have tried a variety of activities such as card games, worksheets, and discussion-based interventions to see if any activity might land with the student. However, the student recently presented to the school as dysregulated, stating that they were irritated. The student was invited into the social work office and disclosed that they are feeling unsupported. Additionally, their comments alluded to the experience of a parentified child, where they provide comfort and support to their parents but receive criticism in return. Beyond this, the student mentioned concerning information regarding their mother's current mental health status. In response, our team offered support, encouragement, and an immediate and a long-term safety plan for the student with the intent to follow up within the coming weeks. So, in considering the application of course knowledge to this specific situation, 3 essentials of cultivating justice were applicable. First, we recognize that relationship keeps us grounded in our humanity. Bonhoeffer, a German theologian, talks about the privilege and protective power of community, specifically in times of immense suffering. Considering Student D, our social work team recognizes the need that we need to lean in and invest in relationship with the student so that they can continue to be grounded in the truth that they deserve dignity, respect, and to be cared for just as they care for others. Secondly, we pursue shalom for the sake of holistic community well-being. Within this course, shalom is defined as wholeness and fullness, the way God intended things to be. Sometimes in encountering multiple forms of suffering at different levels of practice every single day at school, it can feel daunting to vulnerably step into cultivating shalom. However, investing in Student D with the intention of fostering shalom sends ripple effects of peace into the broader community. Thirdly, justice is the natural course of the universe, and we can join in cultivating it. MLK reminds us that suffering and despair never have the final word in our lives or in the lives of the students that we encounter, which offers hope in the midst of overwhelming grief for a lack of wholeness. Additionally, considering the student's racial background, applying Black liberation theology would be applicable. Founder of this theological sect and author James Cone encourages people to view God through the lens of God with us as we suffer. He states that Christ crucified parallels the violence faced by Black people throughout centuries. Christ's alignment with those who are suffering is the cornerstone of Black liberation theology. Cone states that there is peace found in the recognition that Christ is present in the, quote, midnight of human existence. In essence, Black liberation theology contextualizes suffering through lived experience, recognizing that Christ has endured the same and is therefore present in the midst of deep darkness and pain. Furthermore, King speaks about the interconnectedness of justice pursuits in stating, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Contextualizing Student D's experience through this lens provides a gravitas for seeing what God with us really means, and seeing that any move towards justice draws upon and aligns with the broader kingdom narrative. In discussing the problem of suffering, author Richard Rice walks through the core tenets of theodicy, which means asking why evil would happen to good people in this world. First, he states that God is sovereign and the personification of love, which means that God's compassion and power supersedes the impact of suffering on people's lives. Second, Rice acknowledges that suffering is a reality of life and that its presence runs contrary to the original intent of our lives. And lastly, in alignment with the longitudinal kingdom narrative of redemption, Rice argues that suffering, no matter how poignant, will never have the last word. In addition to these tenets, I would propose that 1. Viewing our suffering through the perspective of an embodied existence is the primary way for us to contextualize our suffering. God is intimately and eternally concerned and attuned to the needs of those who are hurting as he desires universal and whole person well-being. Secondly, in order to experience suffering within the context of hope, we need intimate and honest connection in the midst of not being okay. Suffering is a melancholic yet effective uniting force, as it reminds us of our responsibility and deep-seated concern for one another. In order to make sense of the problem of suffering, we each develop a practical theodicy, or an attempt to make sense of the evil in the world. The two theodicies I align with are free will theodicy and soul-making theodicy. At its core, free will theodicy posits that our present suffering can be attributed to the free will and fallen condition of people in this world. In other words, God did not ordain suffering to occur, but through offering free will, the experience of suffering was made a possibility. Free will theodicy explains how a merciful God can be present during inexcusable suffering, as suffering is derived from evil and not God. Free will theodicy does not aid in our capacity to parse out where our solace comes from, though. Is it from God with us, God as love, or a mix of both? In essence, soul-making theodicy states that the cultivation of our personhood for the purpose of meaning-making in life is the core reason why we experience suffering in the world. A key aspect of soul-making theodicy is the mothering principle, which states, as God is with us, he allows us to walk through suffering only if the benefits exceed the ramifications and there is no other alternative. If we try to reframe immense experiences of suffering as opportunities for meaning making and character development, we may cheapen ourselves from experiencing God with us in the midst of our deepest suffering. Indeed, God's presence is not contingent on prosperity or our capacity to frame a painful situation in a good light. Moving beyond Student D and considering other issues facing our school, we see the problem of suffering contextualized through lived experience on each level of practice. The presence of ICE has directly impacted our school in many ways. On the micro level, students are staying home from school, families are having to come up with transportation for their children, and children are missing medical appointments due to fear of deportation, as well as children's mental health is being impacted by ICE presence. On the meso level, there is tension knowing there is to be ICE presence within the neighborhood surrounding our school. Businesses are losing employees, such as our bus drivers, who are not going to work since they present as Somali despite their citizenship status. And lastly, our student body's needs increase, yet we have the same amount or fewer resources to be able to support them longitudinally. Lastly, on the macro level, families are fleeing Minnesota due to fear for their family. Rhetoric from our president has led to a generalized experience of fear. Additionally, this rhetoric has fostered a sense of distrust of the other. These poignant presentations of suffering that I have frequently encountered led to the questions that guide the development of our theodicy. Where is Christ, and why are these particular populations impacted? So we will move on to the next questions. From Bank A, my first question is, how does your theological perspective inform your approach to addressing trauma and suffering experienced by clients, particularly within the context of social work practice? The Book of James has been highly influential in my faith development, as it discusses the praxis of Christianity, that our faith is seen through what we do unto others. Furthermore, as my theological convictions have developed, I firmly believe that there is sanctity within the totality of human experience, meaning moments of despair carry the same significance as circumstances steeped in unbridled joy. Tish Harrison Warren writes, but unless we make space for grief, we cannot know the depths of the love of God. The healing God wrings from pain, the way grieving yields wisdom, comfort, and even joy. I approach people experiencing trauma with an acute attention to the seemingly mundane protective factors and manifestations of grace in their life, keeping these factors in mind as we lean into difficult conversations and emotions with the knowledge that healing begins by feeling. Secondly, how do you foster a sense of agency and resilience among clients who are facing trauma and suffering, while also acknowledging the structural barriers they may encounter? Bonhoeffer states that we require community to bolster our faith in times when suffering seems unbearable and the truths of life are blurred. Furthermore, community redefines how we perceive reality and is able to offer a sliver of hope in the midst of despair. An influential author and theologian in my life, Kate Bowler, states, "What if rich did not have to mean wealthy, and whole did not have to mean healed? What if being people of the gospel meant that we are simply people with good news? God is here, we are loved, and it is enough." Although independent resilience is able to carry us through suffering and despair, longitudinally, we need intentional investment in community to center us in that hope and that truth that God is here with us. Now, for Bank B questions. How do you draw upon your faith traditions to guide your ethical care when working with clients who are experiencing trauma and suffering? Bonhoeffer states that the exclusion of those deemed as insignificant by society is to exclude Christ. And Tish Harrison Warren writes, "Grief is a ghost that can't be put to rest until its purpose has been fulfilled. Emotions, despite their perceived inconvenience, offer us a chance to truly live, to feel the God-ordained ups and downs of an embodied existence in a fallen world." Therefore, in working with clients who have experienced suffering and trauma, I maintain that our emotions alert us to our humanity. As we sit in the mystery of suffering with others, our understanding of Christ increases in nuance and complexity. Brueggemann articulates this point in stating that the reaching redefines the reacher. Therefore, to ethically engage in a relationship with those who are suffering is to open ourselves up to the vulnerability of pain, providing a steady presence over answers. Next question. How do you ensure that your approach to supporting clients experiencing trauma and suffering is grounded in your faith-based values of compassion, empathy, and respect for their inherent dignity and worth as individuals? Professor Richardson stated repeatedly that we are the instruments of our practice, which includes our bodies, minds, and souls. Carrying this sentiment with me, I recognize that to maintain ethical practice and an approach that is grounded in my faith values, I need to ensure that I am personally well. Sabbath is the disciplined refusal of the insatiable demands of injustice that prey upon the neighbor and that permit the illusion of self-sufficiency, says Brueggemann. By having a Sabbath, an established time of rest, I grant myself the opportunity for intentional introspection and reflection on my values and their implementation into my practice. New Testament scholar Philip Hughes states, "What we believe is not to be found in what we say or write, it is found in what we do. Therein is the heart of our belief." Throughout the trajectory of this course, my theory of justice has grown and shifted from its original denotation. However, my theory of justice at the beginning of this course was comprised of a recognition that the manifestation of justice spurs from action and resistance, not passivity and well wishes. Lived experiences rooted in shame, oppression, and suffering are reshaped to narratives of peace, dignity, and wholeness within the context of justice. And due to the transformational power that justice holds, it exhibits a dichotomy of both immense strength and unrelenting empathy. Without sincere concern for the other, justice could not provide healing. And conversely, tenderness without power does not allow for the confronting of broken systems. Therefore, we need both the immense power and the tenderness beyond comprehension. By the end of the course, many of these convictions remained, but the following tenets were added. To comprehend the magnitude of justice actualized, we have to recognize the ramifications of injustice within people's lived experiences. To cultivate justice, we must drive injustice. We must drive injustice, as Tish Harrison Warren writes. But unless We must grieve injustice. Sorry, let me restate that. To cultivate justice, we must grieve injustice. As Tish Harrison Warren writes, but unless we make space for grief, we cannot know the depths of the love of God. The healing God wrings from pain, and the way grieving yields wisdom, comfort, and even joy. A quote that I stated before. And the only way for us to understand the final realization of justice, we must recognize its manifestation in seemingly minute interactions. Martin Luther King Jr. is famously quoted as saying, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." However, the reverse can also be true. A seemingly mundane and small move towards justice in our own lives helps to promote justice everywhere. Lastly, I will say, our world longs for the empathy, healing, and redemption that justice provides. So let's do all we can, with what we can, and as often as we can, to cultivate pockets of justice in our community and our world. Thank you.